Welcome to the Create More Intimacy podcast. I'm Elisa Stoddard, and I help men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. When couples start living like roommates or even move into separate bedrooms, it feels like the end of intimacy. But the truth is, the bedroom isn't the real problem. It's everything that led you there. Welcome to episode 18, Separate Bedrooms in Marriage, Why Intimacy Feels Out of Reach. I hear men all the time say, we're living like roommates. And for some of them, that eventually turns into separate bedrooms. Now, not every couple that sleeps in separate bedrooms is in trouble. Sometimes it's illness. Sometimes it's snoring. Sometimes it's different schedules. And in some marriages, that's the agreement. They choose it, and it works because the intimacy is still there. But for most men I talk to, it's not about comfort. It's about disconnection. By the time you are in separate rooms, a lot has already happened. Pride has gotten in the way, the fights have not been resolved, trust hasn't been restored. And here's where men get stuck. They think that if they could just move back into the same bed, everything would be fine again. But you don't fix intimacy by changing pillows. You fix it by restoring trust, by repairing connection, by facing the real issues that you have been avoiding. And if you and your wife are living like roommates or sleeping apart, it didn't happen overnight. And here's the wake-up call. It's going to take real work to find your way back. But if you're willing to face it, the relationship you rebuild can be stronger than the one you had before. Let's talk about how couples actually get to this place. Sometimes the separate bedroom thing starts out for practical reasons. They choose it and it works because the intimacy is still there. But for most couples, that's not how it happens. More often, the separate bedrooms come from too many fights, or because things feel so tense and so unresolved that it starts out on the couch and ends up in complete separate bedrooms. And that retreating seems easier than to keep trying. For some, it's pride. Neither wants to be the first to repair the damage. The distance just grows and grows. For others, it's avoidance. Sleeping apart feels safer than risking another fight and another rejection. One client told me she just needs more sleep, but the truth is we hadn't touched in weeks, and I knew it wasn't just about sleep. That's how it often looks from the outside. It sounds just like a logistical way to handle things. But the truth is, underneath, it's a relationship that has been stretched far too thin. On the surface, it looks like a sleeping arrangement, but underneath, it's a sign that the real issues are not being faced. And that's why once you're in separate bedrooms, it's so much harder to find your way back. What does it really mean then? Here's the thing. Separate bedrooms are not just about sleep. They're a signal. And by the time you are in different rooms, there is usually a backlog of fights that were never resolved, words that were never said, and hurts that were never healed. Most men see it as a rejection. She doesn't want me, she doesn't love me, and I've failed. But what's really happening is that trust has been broken. And without trust, it doesn't feel safe for her to be close to you. Here's what so many men miss. She'll say, "You don't listen to me." And he thinks it's about the one conversation you had last night, when in reality, it's about the years of her feeling dismissed. Or she'll say, I don't want to have sex. And he hears, she doesn't want me, when really she doesn't feel emotionally safe enough to be vulnerable with sex. She gets quiet or pulls away, and then he thinks she's just moody, when in reality, she is protecting herself from more disappointment. I have seen so many men not hear her until it gets so bad that she threatens divorce or moves out of the bedroom or asks him to move out of the bedroom. And by then, the gap feels almost impossible to cross. But it didn't start with the bedroom. It started with all those small moments of disconnection, with him wanting sex for him, because that's the release that he gets and that's how he feels connected, and not realizing the impact it was having on the relationship. Now, here's where I want you to shift your perspective. Sleeping in separate bedrooms doesn't automatically mean your marriage is doomed. Just the same way that sleeping in the same room in the same bed doesn't mean your marriage is thriving. What it does mean is that you've got a choice about what happens next. Some couples make it work. They just decide, hey, we'll sleep apart so we can actually rest, and we'll still plan intimacy and connection. And that works because they don't let the bedroom define the relationship. The mistake that a lot of men make is thinking that if I just get back in the room, if I just get back in the bed, then everything will be fine. It's not true. I've worked with so many men who finally move back into the same room, and guess what? Nothing changed. And they end up out of the room again anyway. Why? Because the trust and the safety and the closeness had never been rebuilt. The real question here isn't, are you in the same bed? The real question is, are you doing the work to rebuild the trust and the connection no matter where you sleep? Here's the hopeful part. Even if you do stay in separate bedrooms for now, it is worth doing the work, because when you rebuild trust and connection, intimacy can return. And from there, sharing a room becomes a choice, not a battleground. One of the biggest mistakes that I see men make in this stage is taking her words at face value. They hear what she says, but they completely miss what she actually means. So she'll say something like, I'm tired, and he hears, she doesn't want sex. What he misses is that she is exhausted from carrying the mental load of this family and no real partnership. When she says, well, I don't feel close to you, or she just shies away and says no, he thinks, well, we need to go on more dates. We need to go have fun together. And what she actually means is, I don't feel emotionally safe and comfortable opening up to you because you get defensive when we need to talk about anything of great importance. Or she'll say, you don't care. And then he scrambles to prove that he does. Maybe by working harder or buying her something or doing more chores around the house. But what she really means is, I don't feel like we're in this together. I worked with a man once who swore his wife just didn't like sex anymore. That was the story he told himself anyway. But as we dug in, it became clear that she didn't feel emotionally safe with him at all. How did I know? Because he described that every time she tried to open up, he would get defensive, or he would try and set the record straight. And he thought he was just clarifying. But to her, it felt like rejection, like she wasn't even allowed to have her own experience. And that pattern pushed her further away. That's what most men don't see. When you defend yourself, when you correct her version of events, you stay locked in your perspective and you miss her point. And when she stops trying because it doesn't feel safe to keep knocking on that door that constantly slams in her face, most men don't realize that they're translating her words into their own language, which sounds like sex and chores and money, when what she's actually asking for is that emotional connection. And here's the kicker. When they don't understand what she's really saying, every attempt to fix it falls flat. He thinks he's trying, and she feels more unseen. And then he feels rejected and resentful, and so does she, and the gap just keeps widening. So what do you do if you find yourself here, living like roommates, and maybe even in separate bedrooms? Well, the first step is not to push your way back into her room or the room that you once shared. It's to start rebuilding connection and trust in the small, everyday moments. Because until she feels safe with you again, the bedroom is not the real issue. That means listening without defending. When she says, "You don't hear me," instead of proving you do, try saying, "Tell me more. I want to understand." That one shift changes the whole dynamic. It means noticing her experience instead of brushing it off. If she's exhausted, instead of taking that as rejection of you, show up as a partner, step in and lighten the load of your home, and don't keep score. You got to show up as a partner. And it means owning your impact. I know you didn't mean to hurt her. You never intended to hurt her. But if she experienced it as hurt, that matters. Saying, "I see how that landed for you, and I don't want that for us," does more to rebuild trust than any excuse or defense ever will. Here's something critical. Men, you've got to hear me on this. Sex cannot be the only goal. If you are making these changes and helping out around the house and showing up for her just to get sex, she will feel it. That feels like manipulation. This has to be about actual change in behavior, about learning to prioritize connection and intimacy and partnership, not simply because she wants it, because the truth is it will feel better to you too. When she feels safe emotionally and feels seen, physical intimacy can flow from that naturally. One client of mine realized this after years of resentment. He said, "I thought if I worked harder and I paid the bills and I was faithful, then I was entitled to her body." And he saw how sex was the reward for being a good provider. But his wife didn't see it that way at all. She felt used. She felt like a body, not a partner. Because what she wanted was the emotional connection. When he shifted away from that entitlement to her body to genuine connection, by listening and sharing responsibility and showing affection without an agenda, she softened up. She was more receptive. And for the first time in years, they actually felt like partners again. Connection starts in the smallest of things. Curiosity instead of defensiveness. Empathy instead of fixing. Ownership instead of pride. And when you practice those things, she feels safer. And when she feels safer, intimacy can return, even before the bedrooms do. If you and your wife are in separate bedrooms right now, I know you know this by now, but it didn't happen overnight, and it doesn't have to stay this way. Separate rooms, living like roommates, those are symptoms of disconnection. They aren't a life sentence, even though it feels like it. What matters is whether you're willing to do the work to rebuild trust and to change the way you listen and to show up differently than you have before. Because here's the truth. The intimacy you want does not start in the bedroom. It starts in the way that you handle conflict, in the way that you respond when she shares her heart, the way you make her feel safe enough to let you back in. And when you focus there, the bedroom might just take care of itself. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.